My name is Melody Mills, and I am Social Sector Engagement Director at Big Society Capital, and I'm going to be chairing your session this afternoon, which is our webinar all about taking on risk, which is part of the celebration of Trustees Week. I'm joined this afternoon by some esteemed panel here. I have Gemma Bell from Anthony Collins Solicitors, who's live all the way from sunny Birmingham, my home city. So great to have Gemma with us. I've got Jonathan Orchard to my right from St Vincent LLP, and I've also got, talk about diversity, we've got Helen Thompson from Sheffield. So we're very getting around the country today, all by virtue of the powers of the internet, which is great. This afternoon we're going to be talking about managing risk, embracing risk and taking risk. And I thought it would be really good opportunity to hear from our panel members on the different ways that boards can think about how they embrace risk alongside all of the other activities they do. I'm sure for many of us, I'm a trustee myself, and things like embracing risk perhaps don't always seem the most natural things that come from many of the organisations that I've been involved with. However, there are some very brave and bold trustees and some great skills out there, and it's really important that we find the best ways to use those skills. So doing webinars like this where we can share our experiences and ask questions are all part of trying to help the sector grow. So we're going to start off with Gemma, who's going to talk to us about managing risk, following on from Jonathan, then going to Helen, and then we're going to have an opportunity. I'm going to take you through some resources and an opportunity for Q&A. So should we start, and we'll get Gemma to kick off.
Thank you. Let me just try and share my slides. Bear with me, everyone. Here we go. Is that working?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Brilliant. Okay. So hi, everyone. So I'm Gemma Bell, and I'm a partner at Anthony Collins Solicitors. Today, I'm going to be focusing on managing reputational risk and how that links to good governance. Now, Ecclesiastical Insurance issued its Charity Risk Barometer earlier this year, and this identified reputational risk as the #1 long-term concern facing charities. Essentially, I mean, reputation is a charity's biggest asset, and issues with reputation can obviously impact on public donations and other sources of fundraising. So we've seen a number of high-profile failures in the sector over the last few years, and cases of wrongdoing to donate funds, and particularly public bodies who need confidence that any grants, etc., that they're providing will be used correctly by the charities they're providing them to. So firstly, in relation to fundraising, we've seen high-profile issues around charities such as Oxfam, Save the Children, and the NSPCC, who were found to have used exploitative and unethical ways to raise money, often through the subcontractors they were working with. This included things such as the buying and selling of public data, ignoring telephone preference service requirements, and putting pressure on vulnerable people to donate. Bernard Jenkins, who was the chair of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, who reported on these failures, said the trustees were either not competent or were willfully blind to what was being done in their names. I think that's a really key thing to know. Ultimately, as trustees of the charity, you are the ones who, the buck stops with you. These activities are being carried out in your name as trustees, so you need to make sure that you are in control of the activities that are being carried on. Secondly, in relation to financial problems, I mean, the most high-profile one we've seen recently is obviously the Kids Company, which was wound up in 2015. It was wound up as an insolvent charity at that point, and at that point it had received over £46 million in public funding. The Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee again produced a report into what had gone wrong with its company. It concluded there had been negligent financial mismanagement, which rendered the charity incapable of surviving any variance to its funding stream. It's interesting to note that it was still receiving grant a week before it went insolvent. It received £3 million, which was meant to be used for a restructure of the charity, but £800,000 of that was then used to pay staff wage bills rather than being used for that purpose. When the chief executive was questioned on it, she said that the failures were due to a lack of private donation servicing, which were meant to have arisen, which was linked to allegations against the charity in relation to sexual abuse claims, which were then found to be unfounded. But in the report on Kids Company, again, there was found to be a chronic failure of governance with really poor data internally and reported to the trustees of the charity around its financial position and the outcomes that it had in terms of the activities it was carrying out, and also weak control mechanisms in place in the charity. But Kids Company isn't the only example. I mean, it's probably the most well-known example, but there are others. For example, the children's charity For Children, which went into administration in 2016 after it lost key contracts and had funding pressures. Again, just before it went insolvent, that followed a period of rapid expansion by the charity, which was funded in part by private equity funding. So it really raises the concern that why would trustees still be making those decisions and didn't have the information to realise that that was the wrong thing to do, given that it was under such financial pressures. Other things we've seen, obviously, sexual misconduct claims. I mean, most notably the Oxfam issues in Haiti, and that showed evidence of practices being covered up, a lack of transparency, poor safeguarding, also personal data breaches. Again, linked to the fundraising points I discussed before, 11 charities were found recently to have breached the Data Protection Act. An issue with these high-profile failures is the fact that we live in a social media age. So when these things happen, news travels very fast and it stays around for a long time. So we have to be really cautious of what the reputational issues are when we have failures like this in the sector. So going on to think about good governance. Good governance is really at the heart of how organisations and trustees can manage risk. And good governance is not just about when thinking about things like recklessness or mismanagement. It's also things like complacency and inaction. Obviously, as charitable trustees, you have duties to make sure you're using charitable assets for the best, in the best interest of the charity and to further the charitable purposes. That doesn't necessarily mean sitting on assets and holding them back. You should be willing to take risks, but it's thinking about what brakes you need to apply and when you are thinking about taking risks. And good governance is really at the heart of managing risk. And as the Charity Commission's guidance says, CC26 there, risk is an everyday part of charitable activity, and managing it effectively is essential if the trustees are to achieve their key objectives and safeguard the charity's funds and assets. The thing about managing risk, I mean, I think some of the key things that came out of the findings and the high profile failures were obviously issues around oversight of finances and the extent to which trustees were getting information on that, and also internally within the organisation, the extent to which financial information was transparent and was scrutinised in the organisation. Key thing to think about is also relationship with the media and the extent to which if something goes wrong, you have a strategy in place for dealing with issues with the media. Public perception is obviously a key thing to think about. The Charity Commission guidance CC26 categorises reputational risk as just one type of risk. In reality, it's really interwoven with all of the risks that need to be managed by a charity. Key thing to consider is obviously how you're delivering an impact for your users and your customers and beneficiaries. That really needs to go to the heart of how you're operating as a charity. So thinking about how to manage risk in your organisation, firstly, do you have a risk register? If you do, who is this owned by? Really, it should be owned by the board and it should include steps to mitigate risk. It's really important for trustees to understand what levers should be pulled and when, what slow down and stop signs need to look like in your organisation in relation to the activities that you're carrying out. Secondly, thinking about 3 lines of defence, and that's a control mechanism which has been widely used in the financial services sector and also now in sectors such as the social housing sector, for example, which really is designed to provide a framework of checks and balances. It's about having 3 lines within your organisation. So firstly, line 1, having competent people that you employ, establishing an appropriate environment for them to operate in, establishing policies and procedures and seeking assurance from their managers to make sure they're operating the way they should be. Line 2 is about having a series of checks and balances, such as reconciliations, exception reporting, quality assurance functions, really things that make sure that when things go wrong in line 1, they're being caught at an early stage. And then finally, line 3, so audit processes, including any internal audit and financial audit, taking expert advice when needed. And that's normally where we'd expect the trustees to be catching issues if they arise. Thirdly, it's worth thinking about assurance versus reassurance. This is something we quite often talk about with trustees and board members when we think about how they can be reassured and seek assurance in relation to the role they're carrying out as trustees. I think the difference between assurance and reassurance is a vital one. I mean, reassurance is when someone tells you everything's fine, it's all well, don't worry about it. But really, assurance is when someone tells you what's happening, they give you and show you the evidence that you can then look at and decide for yourself that things are happening as they should be. And certainly as trustees, you should be thinking about the extent to which you're getting reassurance versus assurance and when you're challenging evidence given to you. I'm just going to briefly talk about risk investments. I won't talk about this in a lot of detail because I know we've got a session on it in a moment. But when trustees are thinking about investments, obviously thinking about the levels of risk and return, and that will differ in relation to the investments you might be looking at making. So for example, if you're looking at a financial investment from the charity, you'd be looking at a higher level of return normally than you would, for example, where you're doing a program related investment, which is where you look to further your own charitable purposes through an investment. But when you are looking at making investments, you can think about things like, what would be the impact of this on our reputation as an organisation? For example, you could choose that you wouldn't work with certain types of organisation, or you would promote working with certain types of organisation where that really is in alignment with your objects as a charity. You can also think about environmental, social and corporate governance risk. So thinking about things like reputational risk, things like the impact that other organisations might have on the environment or on their nearby social and society and neighbourhood, and then take that into account when you're thinking about whether an investment is a viable one for your organisation. So I thought I'd just finish off with some top tips, really, thinking back again to some of the high profile failures that we've seen. So thinking about skills and experience, do you have the skills and experience you need to oversee all the activities being carried out by your charity? If not, how are you going to get advice or support on that? Really so that you can put yourself in the best position to manage risks in relation to your charity's activities. I think challenge is a key one. I've talked about assurance and reassurance, but also challenge in terms of how you work with, for example, a chief executive of your charity or staff members in your charity. Ultimately, as the trustees, the buck does stop with you. So you should be willing to challenge information provided to you, or challenge the quality of information given to you if needed. It's obviously really important to have a strong control framework in place to make sure that issues such as fraud or financial mismanagement can't take place. When you're thinking about entering into new ventures or taking on new projects, thinking about stress testing those and understanding how they fit with your current financial position as a charity. When we think about some of the failures I talked about earlier, they were still taking on new projects even though they knew that there were financial issues in their charity. I think transparency is a really key one, and certainly in terms of encouraging people within your organisation to report failures, you should be encouraging people to work in a transparent environment, not feel fear in terms of coming forward with concerns or issues. Really, you want staff, etc., to be willing to come forward and speak to you if they see something wrong. And then finally, purpose. So going back to that point, you're there as charitable trustees to further your charitable purposes and your charitable objectives. So really think about what we're doing when we're looking at taking on this risk. How does that fit with our charitable purposes? Are we satisfied that this is in the best interest of the charity?
All right, lovely. Thank you, Gemma. That was great. So we had a really good look there at all of the things that we often hear about. You know, we accept risk. Risk is an everyday part of the role of any organisation and of the trustees. And one of the senses that I got there when Gemma was talking is about the need to talk about risk being shared. It's not something that, you know, one person owns. It doesn't just sit on a piece of paper in a risk register. And actually managing risk is not something to be scared or frightened of. In fact, many charities deal with all different types of risks every day, from the fact that their big contract is maybe not guaranteed, or their fundraising income is not guaranteed, or they may deal with multiple risks and barriers around perhaps just some of the social issues or the individuals that they're trying to help and to work with. So there was some really good practical advice, thank you, Gemma, on the things that you ought to think about as having that sensible process about, you know, being able to secure your reputational risk. Because after all, if you don't have good reputation, good credibility, that's going to limit or your effect and the essentially the impact we want to create, which is why all charities and social enterprises are established. So that was some really good practical advice.